The cold metal floor bit into Hai-Jin's cheek as she slowly opened her eyes. Her head felt like someone had hit it with a hammer. Everything was dark except for a thin line of blue light coming from under what looked like a door. She tried to move her arms, but they were tied behind her back with something that felt like wire. Her legs were also bound together. The air smelled strange, like burned plastic mixed with something sweet and rotten. "Where am I?" she whispered to herself. The last thing she remembered was being on patrol with her team. Sergeant Tae-min had been checking his scanner when Private So-ro suddenly pointed at the sky. Something big and black was falling toward them fast. Then there was a bright flash of light and everything went dark. Hai-Jin tried to sit up. The room was small and the walls were made of the same cold metal as the floor. There was no window. The only light came from that thin blue line under the door. She could hear strange sounds from outside. Clicking noises and what sounded like voices, but not human voices. Her uniform was torn and dirty. There was dried blood on her sleeve, but she could not remember getting hurt. Her rifle was gone. So was her radio and all her equipment. Even her boots were missing. Tae-min, So-ra. She called out quietly. No answer came back. The strange voices outside got louder. Hai-Jin could hear footsteps coming closer. They did not sound like human footsteps. They made clicking sounds on the metal floor, like claws. The door suddenly opened with a loud hiss. Bright white light flooded the room, and Hai-Jin had to close her eyes. When she opened them again, she saw something that made her heart race. 3 tall creatures stood in the doorway. They looked like giant lizards walking on 2 legs. Their skin was dark green and covered in scales. They had long tails that moved from side to side. Their heads were shaped like snakes, but with 4 eyes instead of 2. When they opened their mouths, Hai-Jin could see rows of sharp teeth. One of them stepped forward. It was wearing what looked like armor made of black metal. Around its neck was a small device that began to glow red. "Human female," it said in perfect English, though its voice sounded like grinding metal. "You are awake. Good." Hai-Jin stared at it. The creature was speaking her language, but its mouth was not moving the right way. The device around its neck was glowing brighter when it spoke. "What are you?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "I am Captain Veltar of the Vorthek Empire," the creature said. "You are now our prisoner. Where are my friends? Where is my team?" Captain Veltar made a sound that might have been laughter. "Your friends are dead. The ship was destroyed. You were the only one we found alive in the wreckage." Hai-Jin felt like someone had punched her in the stomach. Tae-min and So-ro were dead. It could not be true. They had been together for 2 years. They were like family. "You lie," she said. "We do not lie about such things. Your friends fought bravely before. They died. You should be proud of them." One of the other creatures said something in a language that sounded like hissing and clicking. Captain Veltar answered in the same language. Then he looked back at Hai-Jin. "My officers want to know why we kept you alive." "It is a good question. Do you know why you are here?" Hai-Jin did not answer. She was trying to think. These creatures, the Vorthek, had captured her. They had killed her team. But why keep her alive? What did they want? "You are here for entertainment," Captain Veltar said. "The Vorthek Empire has many prisoners from many worlds. But we do not keep them in cages forever. We use them for sport." "Sport?" "Yes. We have an arena. We put prisoners inside with our pets. The prisoners fight for their lives. The crowd watches and places bets on how long they will survive." Hai-Jin felt cold fear in her stomach. "You want me to fight animals?" "Not just any animals. We collect the most dangerous creatures from across the galaxy. Hunters, killers, monsters that can tear apart a battle tank." Captain Veltar leaned closer. "No prisoner has ever survived more than 5 minutes. And if I refuse?" Then you die slowly and painfully. If you fight, you die quickly. The choice is yours. Hai-Jin looked at the three creatures. They were all bigger than her. Stronger, they had claws and teeth and armor. But something in their eyes looked familiar. It was the same look she had seen in the eyes of bullies back home. They thought she was weak. They thought she was helpless. When? She asked. Tomorrow. The arena is being prepared. The crowd is excited. They have never seen a human fight before. What do you know about humans? Captain Veltar tilted his head. We know you are weak. Your bodies are soft. You have no claws, no sharp teeth, no thick skin. You rely on your machines to fight. Without them, you are nothing. Hai-Jin almost smiled. These creatures had no idea what they were dealing with. Humans had been fighting and surviving for thousands of years before they had machines. Earth was not a gentle world. It was a planet where everything tried to kill you. The weather, the animals, the plants, even the air could be deadly. Humans had learned to survive by being smart, by being patient, by being more dangerous than anything that wanted to hurt them. You seem calm for someone who is about to die, Captain Veltar said. Maybe I am not the one who should be worried, Hai-Jin said quietly. The three creatures looked at each other. Captain Veltar made that grinding laugh sound again. Brave words. We will see how brave you are when you face the Shadow Maw. The what? A creature from the dark moon of Zephyria. It can become invisible. It has 6 legs and claws that can cut through steel. It hunts by fear. The more afraid you are, the stronger it becomes. Captain Veltar stood up. There will also be a Thornback, a beast with armor like a tank and poison, spikes, and a Voidworm, a flying serpent that can control gravity itself. 3 creatures? Yes, the crowd demanded a special show for the first human. They want to see how quickly you break. The creatures turned to leave. Captain Veltar stopped at the door. I almost forgot. Your execution will be broadcast across the galaxy. Your people will watch you die. It will show them what happens when they fight the Vorthic Empire. The door closed with a hiss. Hai-Jin was alone again in the dark. She sat quietly for a long time, thinking about Taemin and Sora. They had been good soldiers, good friends. They deserved better than dying in some alien ambush, but they were gone now. And she was still alive. Hai-Jin began working on the wires around her wrists. The Vorthic had tied them tight, but they had made a mistake. They had used metal wire instead of rope. Metal could be bent and shaped if you knew how. She had been trained for this. Not just the fighting, but the surviving, the thinking, the planning. The Vorthic thought they had captured prey. They thought they were putting on a show for their crowds. They had no idea that they had just made the biggest mistake of their lives. Tomorrow, the galaxy would see what happened when you put a human in a cage with monsters. They would learn that sometimes the most dangerous monster is the one that does not look like a monster at all. The sound of thousands of voices woke Hai-Jin from her light sleep. She had spent the night working on the metal wire around her wrists. Her fingers were cut and bleeding, but the wire was loose now. She could slip out of it when the time was right. Heavy footsteps came down the corridor. The door opened and 4 Vorthic guards entered her cell. They were bigger than Captain Veltar and carried strange weapons that looked like metal sticks, with glowing ends. Time to go, human, one of them said through his translator device. They grabbed her arms and pulled her to her feet. Hai-Jin let them think the wires were still tight around her wrists. She walked between them as they led her through long metal corridors. The ship was bigger than she had thought. They passed many rooms and saw other Vorthic crew members. All of them stopped to stare at her. Some made hissing sounds. Others showed their teeth in what might have been smiles. They are excited to see you die, one guard said. Are you? Hai-Jin asked. The guard looked at her with his 4 yellow eyes. I have seen many creatures die in the arena. You will last 30 seconds, maybe less. They came to a large metal door. The sounds from the other side were very loud now. Thousands of voices shouting and roaring. The door opened and bright light flooded over them. Hai-Jin stepped into the biggest room she had ever seen. It was like a giant bowl with seats going up and up until they disappeared in the distance. Every seat was filled with Vorthek. They were all looking down at the center of the bowl, where there was a huge cage. The cage was made of thick metal bars that reached high into the air. Inside the cage was not just empty space. There were rocks and twisted pieces of metal. Strange plants with thorns grew in patches. It looked like a nightmare landscape. "Welcome to the Proving Grounds," Captain Veltar's voice came from speakers. "Around the arena, today we have something special. A human from the planet Earth. This weak creature thinks her species can fight the mighty Vorthek Empire." The crowd roared with laughter and anger. They threw things toward the cage. Pieces of food and small objects that bounced off the bars. "She will face 3 of our finest hunters," Captain Veltar continued. "Let us see how long she survives." The guards pushed Hai-Jin toward a small door that led into the cage. Before she went in, she looked up at the crowd. Thousands of reptilian faces stared back at her. They were all waiting to see her die. She stepped into the cage. The door slammed shut behind her with a loud clang. The metal bars were thick as her arm. There was no way to break them or climb over them. She was trapped. The crowd went quiet. Hai-Jin could hear her own heartbeat. She walked slowly to the center of the cage, looking around at the rocky ground and metal structures. Everything was designed to give the monsters places to hide and attack from. A loud horn sounded. Somewhere in the walls of the cage, doors began to open. The first creature that entered made Hai-Jin's skin crawl. It looked like a giant black panther, but it had 6 legs instead of 4. Its claws were as long as knives and its eyes glowed red in the arena lights. This had to be the Shadow Maw that Captain Veltar had talked about. The creature moved in a strange way. Sometimes she could see it clearly. Then it would seem to fade until it was almost invisible. She could only see a slight shimmer in the air, like heat waves. The second creature was completely different. It was huge and covered in thick gray armor. Spikes stuck out all over its body. It walked on 4 legs like a rhinoceros, but it was much bigger. The Thornback. Its spikes were wet with something that dripped onto the ground. Poison. The third creature came from above. It flew through the air like a snake with wings, but it had no wings. Somehow it was moving through the air by itself. The Voidworm. Its body was long and covered in silver scales. When it moved, small rocks and pieces of metal around it began to float in the air. The 3 monsters spread out around the cage. They were in no hurry. They knew she could not escape. The Shadow Maw began to circle her, fading in and out of sight. The Thornback lowered its head and scraped its front hooves on the ground like a bull getting ready to charge. The Voidworm floated above them all, watching. The crowd was completely silent now. Everyone was waiting for the first attack. Hai-Jin stood perfectly still in the center of the cage. She did not run. She did not scream. She did not even look afraid. She just watched and waited. This confused the monsters. They were used to prey that ran or tried to hide. Prey that smelled of fear. But this small creature just stood there like a statue. The Shadow Maw attacked first. It became completely invisible and rushed toward her. Hai-Jin could not see it, but she could hear its claws on the rocky ground. She could feel the air moving as it jumped toward her. At the last second, she moved. She did not just step aside. She dropped to one knee and spun around. Her hands, now free from the loose wires, grabbed something from the ground. A sharp piece of broken metal. The Shadow Maw appeared in the air above her, its claws reaching for where she had been standing. But she was not there anymore. As it flew past her, she drove the metal spike up into its chest. The creature screamed and crashed to the ground. Black blood poured from the wound. It tried to get up but could not. The metal had gone into its heart. The Shadowmaw was dead. The arena was completely silent. No one moved. No one made a sound. Hai-Jin stood up slowly. She pulled the bloody metal spike from the dead creature and looked at the other two monsters. They had stopped moving. They were staring at her with what might have been surprise. Then she looked up at the crowd. Thousands of Vorthic faces stared back at her. Their mouths were open. Their eyes were wide. "Is that all?" She called out loudly. Her voice echoed around the arena. The silence stretched on and on. Then someone in the crowd made a small hissing sound. Someone else clicked their claws nervously. The sounds grew louder as more and more Vorthic began to whisper and hiss to each other. Captain Veltar's voice came over the speakers, but now he did not sound as confident as before. The human has killed the Shadowmaw. This is unexpected. Hai-Jin wiped the black blood from her hands on her torn uniform. She looked at the Thornback and the Voidworm. They were both watching her more carefully now. They had seen what happened to the Shadowmaw. They knew she was dangerous. "Come on then," she said quietly. "Let's finish this." The Thornback lowered its head and charged. The ground shook under its massive weight. Its poisonous spikes were aimed right at her. Hai-Jin ran toward it. The crowd gasped. Running toward a charging Thornback was suicide. The creature was like a living tank. Nothing could stop it, but Hai-Jin was not trying to stop it. At the last second, she jumped to the side and grabbed one of the metal structures in the cage. She swung herself up and out of the way. Just as the Thornback crashed into the wall behind her, the creature hit the metal bars so hard that the whole cage shook. Its spikes got stuck in the bars. It struggled to pull free, roaring with anger. While it was trapped, Hai-Jin jumped down behind it. She grabbed one of its own poisonous spikes that had broken off and drove it into the creature's neck, right behind its armored head. The Thornback made a choking sound and fell to the ground. The poison from its own spike killed it in seconds. Now there was only the Voidworm left. The flying serpent was floating high above the cage, looking down at her. Around it, pieces of metal and rock were spinning in the air. It was getting ready to attack, but something had changed in the arena. The crowd was no longer cheering and laughing. They were scared. Hai-Jin could smell their fear in the air. She picked up another piece of sharp metal and looked up at the Voidworm. "Your turn," she said. The creature dove toward her, using its gravity powers to make rocks and metal fly through the air like bullets. Hai-Jin rolled and dodged, moving between the obstacles in the cage. When the Voidworm got close, she threw her metal spike with perfect aim. It hit the creature in the head, and it crashed to the ground. All three monsters were dead. Hai-Jin stood alone in the center of the cage, covered in alien blood. She looked up at the silent crowd. For the first time since she had been captured, she smiled. It was not a nice smile. The silence in the arena lasted for what felt like hours. Thousands of Vorthic stared down at Hai-Jin as she stood among the bodies of their three most dangerous creatures. Black, gray, and silver blood covered her torn uniform. In her hand, she still held a sharp piece of metal. Captain Veltar's voice finally came over the speakers. But now he sounded different, scared. The human has won. This is impossible. Hai-Jin looked up at the control booth where she could see Captain Veltar's green shape behind thick glass. She raised her bloody hand and pointed at him. "Nothing is impossible," she called out. Her voice carried across the silent arena. "You just don't understand what you're dealing with." Whispers started in the crowd. Quiet at first, then growing louder. The Vorthic were talking to each other in their hissing language. She could not understand the words, but she could hear the fear in their voices. "Bring her back to the holding cell," Captain Veltar ordered over the speakers. The guards who came to get her were different from before. They moved slowly and carefully. They kept their weapons pointed at her even, though she made no move to fight them. When they opened the cage door, they stood as far away as possible. "Move," one of them said, but his voice shook. Hai-Jin walked calmly out of the cage. As she passed the dead monsters, she stopped and looked at each one. Then she looked at the guards. "Your pets were not very good," she said. "Do you have any that are actually dangerous?" The guards said nothing. They just pushed her forward with their weapons, being careful not to get too close. As they walked through the corridors, Hai-Jin noticed something important. Other Vorthik crew members were stopping to stare at her. But they were not looking at her like she was a weak prisoner anymore. They were looking at her like she was something dangerous. Some of them backed away when she passed. Others made nervous clicking sounds with their claws. A few ran away completely. Word was spreading through the ship. The human had killed the Shadowmaw, the Thornback, and the Voidworm. The creatures that no prisoner had ever survived against. For more than a few minutes, when they reached her cell, the guards pushed her inside quickly and slammed the door. She could hear them talking in their language outside. Their voices were high and fast. They were scared. Hai-Jin sat down on the cold metal floor and began to think. The fight in the arena had told her many things about the Vorthik. They were strong and they had good weapons, but they were not used to fighting something that fought back intelligently. Their creatures were dangerous, but they were just animals. They attacked with instinct, not strategy. The Vorthik had never faced anything like a human before. Humans were different. They were not the strongest or the fastest or the most heavily armed, but they were smart. They could adapt. They could turn anything into a weapon. They could think 3 steps ahead of their enemies, and most importantly, they could make their enemies afraid. Over the next few hours, Ji-Jin listened to the sounds of the ship. She could hear the crew talking in the corridors. Even though she did not understand their language, she could tell they were nervous. Footsteps were faster. Voices were higher. Doors slammed more often. The guards who brought her food were shaking. They pushed the tray through a slot in the door and ran away without saying anything. When Captain Veltar came to see her, he brought 6 guards with him instead of the usual 3. All of them had their weapons ready. "You have caused quite a stir on my ship," he said through the door. "He did not come into the cell this time, have I?" Hai-Jin asked. She was sitting calmly on the floor, eating the strange alien food. "I just did what you asked. I fought your pets." "Those were not pets. Those were the most dangerous creatures in the galaxy." "Then you need to find better creatures." Captain Veltar was quiet for a moment. "My crew thinks you are some kind of demon. They say humans are not supposed to be able to do what you did. What do you think?" "I think you got lucky. But luck runs out." Hai-Jin stood up and walked to the door. Captain Veltar and his guards stepped back, even though there were thick metal bars between them. "Let me tell you something about humans," she said quietly. "We come from a world where everything tries to kill us. The weather, the animals, the plants, even the air can be deadly. We have been fighting to survive for millions of years." She grabbed the metal bars with her hands. The guards raised their weapons, but she did not try to break free. She just looked at Captain Veltar with cold eyes. "We learned to hunt creatures bigger and stronger than us. We learned to survive in places that would kill your people in minutes. We learned to turn our weaknesses into strengths. You are just one human," Captain Veltar said. "There are thousands of us on this ship." "And how many of those thousands want to fight me personally?" Hai-Jin asked. "How many want to be locked in a cage with me?" Captain Veltar did not answer. "I killed your monsters with my bare hands and pieces of scrap metal. What do you think I could do to your crew?" "You are locked in a cage, am I?" Hai-Jin smiled. It was the same cold smile she had shown in the arena. "Are you sure about that?" She let go of the bars and stepped back. "You know what the real difference is between humans and your creatures? Your creatures attack because they are hungry or angry. Humans attack because they choose to. We think, we plan, we wait for the right moment. What are you saying? I'm saying that your crew is right to be afraid, because I'm not trapped in here with you. You're trapped out there with me. Captain Veltar stared at her for a long moment. Then he turned and walked away quickly. His guards followed, looking back at her nervously. After they left, Hai-Jin sat back down on the floor. She could hear them talking as they walked down the corridor. Their voices were even more frightened than before. She had planted the seed. Now she just had to wait for it to grow. The fear was spreading through the ship like a disease. The crew members were starting to wonder if keeping her alive was a good idea. They were beginning to question whether their cage was strong enough to hold her, and that was exactly what she wanted them to think. Hai-Jin began to plan her next move. The arena had been a test. She had proven that she could kill their strongest creatures. Now it was time to prove that she could hunt their crew. She looked at the metal walls of her cell. They thought these walls made her their prisoner. They were wrong. These walls were about to become her hunting ground, and the Vorthok were about to learn what it meant to be prey. 3 days passed since the arena fight. In those 3 days, fear had spread through the Vorthok ship like a virus. The crew whispered about the human in the holding cells. They called her Deathwalker and the Nightmare that walks. Hai-Jin could hear everything from her cell. The Vorthok did not know that humans could hear much better than they thought. She listened to their conversations, learned their routines, and began to understand their fears. The night shift guards were the most afraid. They walked past her cell every hour, but now they almost ran. Their claws clicked nervously on the metal floor. Sometimes she would hear them arguing about who had to check on her. On the 3rd night, she decided to have some fun. When guard Corval came for his midnight check, Hai-Jin was ready. She had been lying on the floor pretending to sleep. As his footsteps approached, she suddenly sat up and looked right at the door. Corval stopped walking. She could not see him, but she could hear his breathing change. It became faster and more shallow. "Hello, Corval," she said quietly. The guard made a small choking sound. How did she know his name? He had never told her. The other guards had never used names around her. "I have been listening to you for 3 days," Hai-Jin continued. "You have 2 children and a mate named Liara. You are worried about them because the war with the humans is not going well." Corval's breathing became even faster. This was impossible. She was locked in a cell. How could she know about his family? "You are afraid that your ship will be destroyed and your children will grow up without a father. You are right to be afraid." How do you know these things?" Corval whispered. "I know many things. I know that Gunnar Vel Riss lost his arm in the last battle with human ships. I know that Engineer Turgale has been having nightmares about human boarding parties. I know that Captain Veltar has been sending messages to the Fleet Command asking for permission to kill me." All of this was true. Hai-Jin had heard these conversations through the walls and ventilation system. The Vorthok spoke freely around the ship because they thought she was just a trapped animal. "I also know that you drew guard duty tonight because you lost a bet with Sergeant Colmer. You were supposed to be home with your family, but instead, you are here with me." Corval was breathing so hard now that it sounded like he was going to have a heart attack. "Would you like to know something else?" Hai-Jin asked. "No," Corval whispered. "The human fleet is coming. They are looking for me, and when they find this ship, they are going to tear it apart piece by piece." "You lie." "Do I?" "Check your long-range sensors. I think you will find 3 human destroyers about 6 hours behind you. They have been following your trail since you captured me." This was a lie, but Corval did not know that. He ran away down the corridor, his claws clicking rapidly on the metal floor. Within an hour, half the crew was awake and checking the sensors. They found nothing, but the seed of doubt was planted. Were humans really following them? How could the prisoner know things she should not know? The next day, Captain Veltar came to see her again. This time he brought 8 guards and stayed much further from the cell. "My crew is becoming disturbed," he said. "Are they?" "I had not noticed. You have been talking to the guards, telling them things you should not know. I only tell them the truth." "How do you know about their families, about their fears?" Hai-Jin stood up and walked to the bars. All 8 guards raised their weapons, but she ignored them. "Captain, may I ask you something?" "What?" "How long have you been fighting humans?" 2 years. "And how many battles have you won?" Captain Veltar was quiet for a moment. "We have won many battles. But you have lost more than you have won. That is why you are so far from home. That is why your crew is so afraid. You are running from something, and that something is my people. We are not running. We are on a mission." "What mission?" "Capturing prisoners for your arena? That does not sound like a military mission. That sounds like entertainment for a crew that is tired of losing." Captain Veltar's tail whipped back and forth angrily. "You know nothing about our mission. I know that you are afraid to go home. I know that your empire is losing the war. I know that your crew would rather watch prisoners die than face human ships in battle. Enough! I also know that you are planning to kill me. Not in the arena, but quietly. You are going to tell your crew that I died of injuries from the fight. Then you are going to space my body." Captain Veltar's 4 eyes went wide. This was exactly what he had been planning. "How could you possibly know that?" "Because I know how scared minds work. When you are afraid of something, you want to make it go away. You think that if you kill me, your crew will stop being afraid. But you are wrong. I am not afraid of you. Then why are you standing so far away? Why did you bring 8 guards instead of 3? Why are your hands shaking?" Captain Veltar looked down at his hands. They were indeed shaking. "You want to know something funny?" Hai-Jin said. "Killing me will not make your crew feel better. It will make them feel worse. Because then they will know that their captain is so afraid of one human that he had to murder her in her cell. You are trying to manipulate me. I am telling you the truth. Your crew is watching you, Captain. They are wondering if you are strong enough to lead them. If you kill me like a coward, they will know the answer." Captain Veltar stared at her for a long moment. Then he turned and walked away without saying another word. His guards followed, but they kept looking back at her. That night, Hai-Jin heard the crew talking in the corridors. They were arguing about what to do with her. Some wanted to kill her immediately. Others wanted to put her back in the arena. A few suggested just dropping her off on the nearest planet, but they all agreed on one thing. Keeping her alive was dangerous. That the next morning, something changed. The guards who brought her food were different. They were part of the ship's security team, not regular crew members. They wore heavier armor and carried bigger weapons. More importantly, they looked angry instead of afraid. "The captain has made a decision about you," one of them said. His name tag read Sergeant Colmer. "Has he? You are going to have an accident. The life support in your cell is going to fail. Very sad, but these things happen." Hai-Jin smiled. "I wondered when you would try this." "Try what?" "Captain Veltar is too afraid to kill me himself, so he sent you. But he did not tell you the truth about what will happen next." "Nothing will happen next. You will be dead." "Will I?" "Tell me, Sergeant, have you ever killed a human before?" "No." "Then you do not know what happens when you kill one of us." "Sergeant." Comer laughed. "You die, just like any other creature." "No. When you kill a human, especially one that other humans are looking for, you make them angry. Very angry. And angry humans are much more dangerous than scared humans. No one is looking for you. Are you sure? Check your sensors again. I think you will find that those 3 human destroyers are now only 4 hours behind you." This was still a lie, But Sergeant Colmer did not know that. He left to check the sensors, just like Corval had done. But this time, Hai-Jin had a different plan. While he was gone, she began to work on the life support system in her cell. She had been studying it for days, learning how it worked. The Vorthak had made it easy to access for maintenance, but they had never thought that a prisoner might know how to repair it. Or how to break it in a very specific way. When Sergeant Colmer came back with his team to accidentally shut off her life support, they were going to get a very big surprise. The hunt was about to begin. Sergeant Colmer returned 2 hours later with 3 other security guards. They were all wearing full combat armor and carrying heavy weapons. They thought they were coming to quietly kill a trapped prisoner. They had no idea they were walking into a trap. "Time to go, human," Colmer said as he opened the cell door. "The captain wants to see you." Hai-Jin knew this was a lie. They were going to take her to an empty part of the ship and kill her. Then they would tell the crew she died of her injuries. "Of course," she said calmly. "I have been waiting." As they walked through the corridors, Hai-Jin memorized every turn, every door, every ventilation grate. She had been planning this moment for days. The ship's layout was already mapped in her mind from listening to conversations and footsteps. They entered a section of the ship she had never seen before. It was darker here and smelled of machine oil. This was the engineering deck, far from where other crew members would hear anything. "This is far enough," Colmer said. He raised his weapon. "Any last words?" "Yes," Hai-Jin said. "You should have checked the life support system in my cell more carefully." "What?" "I made some changes to it while you were gone. In about 30 seconds, it is going to explode." Colmer laughed. "You are lying. You have been locked in that cell for days." "Have I? Are you sure?" Before he could answer, a loud explosion echoed through the ship. Emergency alarms began to sound. Red lights flashed in the corridors. The 4 guards looked at each other in confusion. How had the prisoner known that was going to happen? While they were distracted, Hai-Jin moved. She had been waiting for this moment. Her hands were no longer tied. Her body was ready. And most importantly, she was no longer in a cage. She grabbed the nearest guard's weapon and broke his arm in one quick motion. Before the others could react, she had rolled behind a large pipe and disappeared into the shadows. "Find her!" Colmer shouted. She cannot have gone far, but Hai-Jin was already gone. She had slipped into a ventilation shaft that she had identified days ago by listening to air currents. The Vorthak were too big to follow her through the narrow space. She crawled through the ship's ventilation system like a ghost. She could hear the guards running around below her, searching every room, every corridor. They had no idea where she was. The ship's alarms were still sounding. Over the intercom, she could hear Captain Veltar shouting orders. The crew was in panic mode. They thought the explosion was an attack from outside. They did not realize the attack was coming from inside. Hai-Jin made her way to the ship's main computer core. It was guarded, but the guards were facing outward, watching for threats from the corridors. They were not watching the ceiling. She dropped down behind them silently. Both guards were unconscious before they knew she was there. The computer core gave her access to everything. Ship's systems, crew locations, communications, weapons. But most importantly, it gave her access to the ship's long-range transmitter. She began to send a signal on a frequency that only human ships would recognize. It was a distress call with her location and status. If any human ships were in the area, they would come running. Then she began to hunt. The Vorthak crew was spread throughout the ship, searching for her in groups. They thought safety was in numbers. They were wrong. Groups were easier to track and predict. She started with the engineering crews. They were isolated in the lower decks, working to repair the damage from the explosion she had caused. They never saw her coming. One by one, she began to eliminate key personnel. Not randomly, but strategically. She targeted the engineers who kept the ship running, the gunners who operated the weapons, the technicians who maintained the life support. Each elimination was designed to send a message. She left the bodies where other crew members would find them. She wanted them to know she was coming. After the third group of bodies was discovered, Captain Veltar's voice came over the intercom. "Attention all crew. The human prisoner has escaped. She is somewhere on the ship. All personnel are to travel in groups of 6 or more. All sections are to be secured immediately." Hee-jin smiled as she listened from inside an air duct. 6 or more? That just made them easier targets. She continued her hunt through the night cycle. The ship had become a maze of fear. Crew members barricaded themselves in rooms. Others ran through the corridors in large groups, jumping at every sound. But Hei-jin had grown up on Earth. She knew how to hunt. She knew how to wait. She knew how to strike when her prey was most vulnerable. By the morning cycle, 12 Vorthek. Crew members were dead. The rest were too terrified to leave their stations. Captain Veltar had locked himself on the bridge with his senior officers. They had sealed all the doors and posted guards at every entrance. They thought they were safe. They were wrong. Hee-jin had found another way in. The ship's waste disposal system connected to every part of the vessel, including the bridge. It was not a pleasant route, but she had crawled through worse things during her military training. She emerged from a maintenance hatch behind the captain's chair. The bridge crew was so focused on watching the doors that they never thought to watch the floor. "Hello, Captain," she said quietly. Every Vorthek on the bridge spun around. Captain Veltar's 4 eyes went wide with terror. He had thought she was somewhere else on the ship. How had she gotten onto the sealed bridge? "Impossible," he whispered. "You keep using that word. I do not think it means what you think it means." The bridge crew raised their weapons, but Hei-jin was already moving. She had studied their positions, their weapons, their reaction times. She knew exactly what each of them would do. Within seconds, half the bridge crew was down. The others were too scared to shoot, afraid they might hit their captain or damage the ship's controls. "Stop!" Captain Veltar shouted. "What do you want? What do I want?" Hei-jin grabbed him by the throat and lifted him off the ground. The Vorthek was much larger than her, but fear had made him weak. "I want you to understand what you have done. We captured you for the arena. It was just entertainment. You killed my friends. You broadcast my fight across the galaxy as propaganda against my people. You tried to murder me in my cell. I am sorry, we made a mistake. Yes, you did. You made the biggest mistake of your lives." She looked around at the terrified bridge crew. "You thought you captured prey. But you did not capture prey. You captured a predator." Alarms began to sound again. But these were different alarms, long-range sensors. "Captain," one of the surviving crew members said in a shaking voice, 3 human destroyers have just dropped out of hyperspace. They are heading directly for us." Captain Veltar looked at Hei-jin with new horror. "The signal, you called them. I told you they were coming. You should have listened. Please. We surrender. We will return you to your people." "Too late for that, Captain. You wanted to show the galaxy what happens when someone fights the Vorthek Empire. Well, now the galaxy is going to see what happens when someone fights humanity." The human ships opened fire. The Vorthek vessel shook under the impact of weapons designed to crack open armored hulls. "This is Admiral Dong Hyen of the Terran Defense Corps," a voice came over the radio. "Vorthek vessel, you are ordered to surrender immediately and prepare to be boarded." Hei-jin smiled and activated the ship's communication system. "Admiral, this is Lieutenant Hei-jin. The ship is secure. You may board at your convenience." "Hei-jin? We thought you were dead. Your whole squad was listed as casualties." Taemin and Sora are dead, sir, but I am very much alive. And I have some prisoners for you." She looked around the bridge at the surviving Vorthek crew. They were all staring at her with absolute terror. "The galaxy wanted to see a show," she said quietly. "Well, they got one. They learned that when you put a human in a cage with monsters, sometimes the human is the scariest monster of all." The boarding shuttles were already on their way. Soon, the Vorthek would be the ones in cages. And the story of what happened when they tried to cage a human would spread across the galaxy. Other alien species would hear the tale and remember it. They would think twice before attacking human ships or capturing human prisoners, because now they knew the truth. Humans were not prey. Humans were the hunters, and the hunt never ended. The end.